Since Donald Trump came to power, relations between the U.S. and Europe have been in jeopardy. Although major European countries maintain strategic communication with the U.S., ties seem to have become tepid. Trade disputes and the undermining of the Iran nuclear agreement have brought relations to the lowest level since the Cold War. The rift over trade, security, and culture is widening. How does worsening U.S.-European relations impact a wide range of social, economic, and geopolitical issues? And what is the exorbitant cost of Trump's America going it alone? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Ms. Claire Pearson, the International Development Director at DLA Piper, and Dr. Rick Dunham, a visiting scholar at Tsinghua University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue. The U.S. has repeatedly bumped heads with the European Union and its member states over NATO defense spending, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership negotiations, and the Paris climate deal. Recently, the Iran nuclear deal becomes a focus in the debates across the Atlantic Ocean. Is this increasing the rift between the European Union and the United States, Rick?
I think it's definitely cementing a rift between the European Union and the Trump administration, Donald Trump and the administration. I think that the danger is that it is a lasting rift with the United States itself, that it goes beyond the time Donald Trump is in the White House. He clearly has a different set of priorities. He disagrees with the EU and European leaders in general on a wide range of issues, starting with trade, and secondly, the role of Europe in the world, and it goes from there.
And do you think the European Union is ill-prepared for the dramatic turn in the transatlantic relationship?
I think they're ill-prepared to a degree, but I think overall, I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric from Donald Trump, but in reality, the underlying action is not as threatening as the rhetoric. So I think the EU is not that worried, because there are things that cement the bilateral relationship between Europe and the Atlantic, which really are hard to do away with.
The black horse, I'm afraid, is populism, which could easily take the blame for the decline in the relationship. Look at the recent campaign success of Northern League and Five Star Movement in Italy, to say nothing of Brexit. So President Trump rose to the White House on the platform of populism. And therefore, do you think this is the common enemy?
I think that this is a common thread, the right-wing populism. You look in Hungary, you look in Italy, you look in France, even though it was defeated in France, you look at Brexit. So I do think it's the common thread. And it is the enemy of European integration. It is the enemy of a united Europe moving forward. It's a challenge for the European leaders, but I don't think in and of itself the concept of populism is the danger. It's if these leaders, if populist leaders take over and start changing policy and challenging the EU.
Do you think populism could help divert public attention from the real issues, the real challenges?
I think populism ultimately will be subjugated by more pervasive threats like climate change, migration, security issues. These are the things that will dominate the headlines in the next decade. Populism, yes, it's an issue at the moment because of the divide between the rich and poor, but governments will respond to it. Democracies have a way of healing themselves. I think Europe will recover. Angela Merkel showed real leadership in welcoming 1 million migrants to Germany. If the US continues to destabilize the Middle East, there will be massive migration from the Middle East into Europe. So actually, it might not be populism that's the threat, it might be Trump's foreign policy.
Do you think the divided Britain of the United Kingdom will help set up a bridge between the two sides, European Union and the United States of America? Prime Minister Theresa May could hopefully become somebody to cement solidarity of the transatlantic relationship.
Well, May and Trump, or maybe Meghan Merkel and Harry. You know, there's a few people who don't have too much antagonism between them. All these guys are holding hands. So I think ultimately that the rise of populism in Britain, Brexit, Trump, it's actually the same thing. In fact, it's the same database we found out from Cambridge Analytica. It's in fact the same people. It's the people for whom globalization has been beneficial for the last 20 years, rabble-rousing the people who are racist. So Brexit, Trump, they appeal to the same group. So I think Britain and the US have a lot in common at the moment. We're going through a racist period, we're going through a rift between the rich and the poor, but after a Trump, you'll get another Obama. After a May, you'll get another more liberal leader.
And despite the absence of politicians, the royal wedding ceremony put together peoples across the Atlantic Ocean, right? That serves as a common appeal. It does appeal to the mind and heart and the ordinary folks, particularly the disadvantaged groups. The cause of charity may serve as the bond that holds Prince Harry with the dear and pretty American wife, right?
Well, and if we want to be optimistic, the good news was that there was no racist backlash in America. I mean, as I was monitoring social media, there were not racist tweets from the populist right. So at least when it comes to royal weddings, they seem to have united Americans from populists to the left.
Trade, security, cooperation, and the shared value system are three major bonds that keep the U.S. and Europe close. Do you think these three major pillars start to decline, start to disintegrate? Or it is too early to predict that such things would discredit this relationship between the two sides? Claire?
Well, I think, what do they say? Strategy without tactics is a slow failure. Tactics without strategy is just a noise before defeat. I think the world is falling increasingly into the TPP world and the Belt and Road world. By that I mean the old relationships, the old acronyms that you and I grew up with, Yang Ray. They were things like NATO, IMF, things that came out of Bretton Woods, the agreements were signed in 1945, 1949. But since I came to China, I found there's new acronyms on the table. I learned FOCAC in 2006, Forum on China and Africa. And then in 2008, I started hearing OBOR, 2013, One Belt, One Road. I also learned AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Recently, I've learned CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So the acronyms, or the anachronistic agreements that used to govern the bipolar world of Russia versus America, is kind of out of date. We're moving from this sort of rule-laden world into a sort of rights for the underdog-laden world, because Belt and Road is nothing short of a development program, and I think history is going to judge whether your country went with TPP, which is about protecting intellectual property for rich countries, versus Belt and Road, which is about improving the lives of 60 impoverished countries. So I think today there's two countries, there's two companies. There's countries and companies that stuck with the Bretton Woods world order, that stuck with the bipolar world. And then there's the group that went with Belt and Road and moved into the future because they realized the big topics today aren't preserving your intellectual property, they're preserving your peace because you empower the poor in the Middle East and Africa.
Well, as I see the changes economically, which are undoubtedly true, you do have an old world of security, and I think that's what binds the United States to Western Europe and even to much of Central Europe. It's post-Cold War, but it's Cold War redux with Russia, and I think that the threats that a lot of European countries see are what drive them toward the United States on security, even as we go into a new world economically, a new world of trade, a new world of alliances, a new world of acronyms.
Most of the Chinese viewers and netizens would find your analysis conciliatory, mild, polite. However, it won't serve to please your president, Mr. Donald Trump, because your manifesto, your analysis sounds like a manifesto about a new chapter on globalization would bring Democrats, Republicans, and particularly President Trump, to the edge of their seats, because they see the rise of China as an effort to discredit the United States democracy, to dismiss the American power, and to dismantle the world order that was built by the United States in the wake of the Second World War. They see everything in negative, in black and white terms, in zero-sum game terms. So don't you think you would utterly go against the American leadership?
No, I not at all. I'm half Irish, half my family live in New York. You know, why do I care? I think America is flexible enough. Look, there's Trump, but there's also Ivanka. There's the old and there's the new. Let's face it, Ivanka has just registered her IP for her fashion company in China.
Ivanka has been dismissed, brushed aside
don't
by
worry.
the new chief of staff in the White House.
You can brush her aside, but you can't divorce your children. You know what I mean? When Dad goes home, she probably says, look, look, Dad, there's a massive market in China, and I want to sell my kit. And so don't be too harsh on ZTE, not for a couple of days. You can see those two are talking.
But Americans get united behind the banner of bashing China.
No.
They view China as a too confident, assertive, and very much a threat to the future of the world.
I think you have a divide there. The political world, yes, it's a free shot. It's a free shot whether you're Nancy Pelosi with the Democratic left or Ted Cruz with the Republican right. But it's a different world, and you have a different outlook. The Barack Obamas, even the George W. Bushes, are not about a zero-sum game. I mean, I think that rhetoric is out of date even in the United States. I mean, Donald Trump believes in winners and losers, and he's always a winner. But I think the business community, and I think most of the political community, believes in economically, let's build the global economy.
The new master in the White House puts America first, calling for buying America, hiring Americans. And do you think this man would assume the world leadership, or would rather turn to Germany for help? Because Germany, look at what happened in the 1950s. It rebuilt the economy. In the 1960s, they started to apologize and reflect upon the guilt of wartime atrocities. And last year and the year before, Chancellor Angela Merkel accepted up to 1.2 million poor asylum seekers from war-torn countries and areas in the Middle East. So Angela Merkel comes across as an emerging leader of the world, perhaps, at least in continental Europe. And yet, it keeps such a low profile. Who will assume the world leadership? Angela Merkel, President Xi Jinping, certainly not Donald Trump, who is so controversial for the whole world.
I quite like the new president in Malaysia, not least because he's 92, but because he's in charge of one of the world's largest Muslim countries. It's multicultural. The economy is back on track. I met some of his government officials in Beijing yesterday. Very impressive. He's got a top game there. So I think we're going to find new bridge builders. Merkel was certainly the woman of the hour, maybe for the last decade, because she had an East German mindset and a West German mindset. I used to love it when she came to China, because she always gets down and dirty and goes and inspects an Audi factory. She does what you should do in a communist country. She goes and gives face to the workers. She gets it. We get too many world leaders who come to China and sort of faff around in a five-star in
she's
Shanghai.
awash with a bit of memories about the Stasi police state of East Germany as well. She came from a religious family background.
Yeah, she's pro-peace before she's pro-politics.
I mean, I think you have two sets of leaders. You have Angela Merkel has become the leader of the, quote, free world, has taken that role from the American president. And then you have President Xi Jinping, who is assuming a leadership in terms of global economy. I mean, I think these are happening in parallel. They're not necessarily in conflict with each other.
Under the excuse of national security, Claire, the White House levied high tariffs on its allies, including the EU. In addition, Trump criticized the terms of trade with Europe and demanded that the EU open up its market to a larger extent. How should the EU defend the interests of its member states?
Do you know, if you're mean to me, Yang Ray, the best way to get back at you is to be nice to you and show that we're having a great time. So if I'm Europe and US is giving me a headache, why don't I just go and talk to China? So let's look at where BMW actually sells. 24% of BMW cars sold in China, 14% in the US, 5% UK. So actually, let's face it, Trump, he's a politician. He's got elections coming up.
He's a politician or he's a business executive?
He's a business executive acting as a politician. We all know that. But at the same time, he's got an election in November 2018. So he's got to play to the crowd. He's got to say, Europe, you're nasty. ZT, you're nasty. He's saying everyone's nasty. But in reality, he just wants a bit of biz because he wants to run Trump Inc. when he leaves the White House. So I wouldn't worry about Trump at all. He makes a lot of noise to get a lot of votes at home. But in reality, we know he holds hands with Theresa May. We know they speak the same language. We know we've just cemented our royal families. Yes, the Hollywood royal family.
What do you think of the presidency of Donald Trump, which is usually known for being conciliatory, followed by threats, followed by anger, followed by, but never the word of compromise? So what do you think of the reliability of your presidency?
Well, I think when it comes to Europe and much of the world, they get the game, and I think that they don't take the bait. They don't respond to the emotional outbursts, and they wait to see what happens after he announces something. Because just like with the summit that was off and on, something changes in 24 hours. So I think that right now, countries around the world, whether they're traditional allies, adversaries, partners, are playing the long game and are dealing with the United States at large rather than the current president of the United States. I think that's the only way to go. Otherwise, you're going to be turning your head every day back and forth as he says something new.
What do you think of the future of the Transatlantic Partnership and Investment, TTIP? Is it moribund, or after some negotiations, the two sides, the United States and the European Union, will sit down and talk about compromise?
You've got to negotiate. I've just been in Russia for the last week, and we met a lot of businesses while I was there. How's trade? Do you know what they said? They said, no problem. Now we're selling all the soya beans that China used to buy from the US. So they are not affected at all by things like sanctions. So making bilateral agreements is what businesses do. And I think this is going to happen irrespective of whether it's formalized in TTIP or TPP Light or whatever they call it. So I think there's going to be side deals going on the whole time. I think Donald Trump has to say something in public to protect his steel, his aluminium, his manufacturing base. Fine, let him say it in public. In private, I know every time I come off CGTN, 12 people email me and say, actually, we're very pro-China, but we're stuck with this US government. Can we just do a deal? So in reality, there's lots of ways to do business that aren't aligned with your government
The underlying
strategy.
issue behind the TTIP or cancellation of the Iran nuclear deal, I'm afraid, is the US dollar. The US dollar became the dominant reserve currency since perhaps the early 1970s, to say nothing of the victory defeating Nazi in the Second World War. Therefore, the United States assumed leadership through the Marshall Plan. But look at the political will of Europeans to replace the US dollars with the euro. If American business community, if the European business communities got hurt, should President Trump impose economic sanctions on the Persian state? What do you think of the possibility that the US dollar would inevitably decline, since RMB and the euro would join hands to pose a challenge?
Well, I don't think that it's a decline in value, but as a reserve currency, I think that that's a very good question to see what happens in coming years. I mean, to me, Trump is not the number one factor. The number one factor is a united Europe. If the Eurozone can remain intact, then yes, then
it's a big question. If
right.
the European Union could remain intact.
Exactly. Then there is a risk to the dollar as a reserve currency. Then I think you will see changes. And I think you're right. It comes from both Europe and China. And I do think we're going to see a change. I mean, I don't know if you call it a basket. I mean, there are all sorts of economic terms that you could use, but I do think that the dollar will not be as strong a power as the reserve currency in the globe over the next 20 years.
Let me follow up the question on the integration of the European Union in the future of this regional bloc. The newly appointed Prime Minister of Italy, the third largest economy of the European Union, stepped down, and the coalition government of Italy, do you think it will be the catalyst for the disintegration of the European Union? Because it says no to the European Central Bank, it says no to the perhaps discipline of Chancellor Angela Merkel, fiscal one. So what do you think of the impact of populism in Italy? We are looking at the future of the European Union.
I think it raises a red flag, but I think it's a situation...
Not a red flag, but five-star movement.
Yeah, well, yeah, the red flag with 5 stars. Okay. So the 5...
Red star over time. Adding us no.
Yeah, I was just looking at the manifesto of the 5-star movement. It's fundamentally fairly racist. And you know why? Because we all know that in Europe, Italy bears the brunt of the migration from Middle East and Africa. You know, I was in DC just after Trump was elected, and I watched the protesters on the White House lawn, and there was a group all sitting down quietly. I thought, everyone else was yelling and shouting, so I thought, who is this group? So I went and had a chat with them. They were a group who were working specifically to integrate migrants into Italy. They were a Vatican group, and you've got to understand the politics in Italy. You know, there's the Vatican, there's the people, there's the youth, there's the racists, there's the migrants. So in a way, Italy is an important country to watch, because what happens there first with the influx of migrants is going to happen next in Northern Europe as people move north. So I think it's beholden to the rest of the European countries to help Italy with its currently unstable situation. But to be honest, Northern Europe's never listened to Southern Europe anyway. Does Beijing listen to Shenzhen? No.
Campaign success of Italy might be an issue again of populism and its impact upon the future of the European Union. But yet another underlying issue of the Iran nuclear deal is the refugees. And you put your finger on a very sensitive issue, because the Europeans are very much concerned about nuclear proliferation in the volatile region of the Middle East. If economic sanctions, more severe economic sanctions were to be imposed by the White House on the Persian state, then neighboring countries of this Shiite majority government, the Persian state, would be prepared to have nuclear warheads, to get nuclear armed, and then it would be a disaster for Europeans, because that will deliver more refugees to continental Europe. So what do you think of the grave concerns?
Well, I think there are 3 levels of concern. One is the immediate issue in Syria, Gaza, in the area right on the doorstep of Europe, of Turkey and Europe. The second is the sanctions against Iran, the immediate aftermath and the destabilization of both European businesses if there are sanctions and the economy in Iran. And the third is what you talked about, which I think is longer term, of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. I think Europe is really afraid of that, but I think they're more afraid of the immediate issues of influx of people coming across the borders now, not what would happen in 3-5 years.
I think that's the key topic, and that is the topic that's really causing the NATO instability. Trump's clicking his fingers and saying, everyone, you've got to spend 2% of GDP on weapons. Merkel's saying, no, I'm spending the money on giving aid to Africa. I think that if we give people jobs, food, opportunity, it's the Belt and Road. So Merkel, China, a lot of Asia are aligned on give people infrastructure, give people a special economic zone, give people training, and we get rid of ISIS anyway. Trump just wants to drop a bomb. It's not sophisticated. We're not in an era anymore where we can just drop a bomb, destroy Iraq, create migrants, destabilize Europe with migration. Trump is so 1985.
Are you
it is now
alluding to the mother of all bombs in Jerusalem, where the relocation of the American embassy triggered yet another intifada? Up to 60 Palestinians were killed by snipers.
I mean, this is so serious. They've got blood on their hands. You can't just listen to Jerusalem and Saudi in the Middle East. There's bigger countries. There's lives at stake. China understands that. China's foreign policy is pretty simple. Go and have tea with people, offer them a railway, build them a road, give them access to a city, a hospital, a school, and a university.
We are accused of exporting China models, and if not our values and soft power. The Americans are so obsessively concerned about a change in the world order with China's model. I mean, let's put this issue aside. It takes hours to clarify what China's global expansion actually means. Is it a blessing or a curse for the future of the U.S. world leadership? Now, the next issue is Angela Merkel vows to take into European Union's own hands the security, defense, since she, along with Macron, complained that the United States may not be so reliable. Germany is clearly aware that its high technology is at the mercy of the U.S. market, the unpredictability of the U.S. presidency. Car sales 15% or what in the U.S. market. So the future of the German economy, this powerhouse of the continental Europe, is at the mercy of the U.S. market, and therefore Europeans start to build a consensus. They must take into their own hands the future of the European Union. Will that be a blessing for, no, will that be a threat to the future of the transatlantic relationship, Claire?
Well, I think Europe is increasingly going to look east, because if the relationship frays with the US, it will never completely fray, particularly with Britain because of the linguistic commonality. But in reality, everybody in Britain knows that China's the future. I know that. I mean, I met Prince Andrew. He was here yesterday. And he was saying globalization has become a bad word in Britain. Why? Because we didn't share the spoils of globalization. The bankers got rich in London, the money didn't reach Scotland. But you can do globalization in China where you give people school, hospital, health, and then globalization won't be a bad word. Globalization itself is not a bad concept, it's how you do it. So I think that what we're going to see, I don't care whether it's China or America or whoever's doing it, but you have got to be a good global citizen today.
Hey, come on, we have our own vulnerabilities. Look at the media event that went viral on the internet concerning the crackdown on teachers' protests in a little city in Anhui province. I mean, teachers were handcuffed. I mean, they were arrested by the riot police simply because they demand compensation for their meager income, and due to the local debt as well as a shortage of local fiscal revenue, teachers became the first casualty of local debts. Are we ready to assume world leadership in the process of globalization? We have to look at our own vulnerabilities.
Well, I had lunch with my secretary today, and she said, you know, we just need to improve the quality of our people. She was saying that to me. She's the one who speaks Chinese, German, and English. She's the secretary, I'm the lawyer. So I think the quality of your people is just fine, and it's improving. Are there bad things that happen? Sure. I heard a good joke when I was in Russia recently. One of the Russians said to me, well, a hippopotamus has got bad eyesight and bad smell, but it's not a problem for the hippopotamus. Do you see what he's saying? He's saying that we're going to run out of water, we're going to run out of food globally, and the huge countries, the Russia-China bloc, can just roll over on the smaller countries. People don't get it. The issues today, they're not IP, they're not bilateral agreements, it's not transatlantic issues. Food, water, environment. Russia's got food, water, environment. It stretches from China to 15 kilometers from the US. Russia plus China plus Belt and Road. You don't US, Europe, it's just going to be singing in the dark.
You know, the wake-up call for Chinese netizens in their millions is the US punishment of ZTE. And it's a wake-up call. Most Chinese learned one lesson. We need to keep a low profile. We should not tend to propaganda about our global ambition. Well, that's a big topic. Thank you very much for being with us on this edition of Dialogue, talking about the future of the transatlantic relationship and what China can do to help the process of globalization. See you next time. Goodbye.